My dear brothers and sisters, the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. My name is Ramesh Bijlani, and I have with me here a young budding psychologist, Asmita Bijlani, who is doing her master's in psychology at the Jamia Millia University in New Delhi. A few days back, she told me that she is reading the works of Sri Aurobindo, especially related to psychology, for a college assignment. So as a devotee of Sri Aurobindo, that was music to my ears, that such universities are also now taking interest in Sri Aurobindo's works and encouraging their students to read them. So I asked her if I could be of any help. And she said, yes, she did have a few questions. So that's how we are here together. Asmita, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm glad to have this opportunity. My question today is that while reading Sri Aurobindo's works, I saw that he mentioned several times that our self, our ego, and our individuality as we know it is not our true self. We are, in fact, part of a higher consciousness, and all that we are is a part of that higher consciousness. So I was just wondering that if our unique personalities and our individuality then holds any value, uh, how does us being different from each other and having such unique uh, traits and personalities play a part?
That's a very good question. And I may begin by saying that Sri Aurobindo has never made a wholesale condemnation of the ego or individuality. In fact, he has given great importance to the uniqueness of each individual and the freedom that that person should have to grow along the lines that are in keeping with the individual temperament and makeup. So that is something he has emphasized. But all the same, the fact that the ego is not our deepest reality is also a fact, and that not only Sri Aurobindo, I mean, all spiritual masters have talked about, because we are a manifestation of the divine. The divine consciousness is supreme, but then in all creation, only a small fraction of that has been expressed. And that is true also of human beings. And one of the expressions is our mind. And the mind is a partial and a flawed expression of the higher consciousness. The ego is also, in a way, a part of the mind. You know, one can look at it like this, that say if our deepest reality is the soul is silent most of the time. We are not aware of it. And it remains sort of aloof. Something like, you know, the president of India. He's supreme, but then he's not expected to participate in the day-to-day affairs of the country. That is what the prime minister does. So the prime minister is the ego. And then it has three ministers to take care of different portfolios: the body, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect. And by and large, our consciousness revolves around this prime minister and these three ministers. And it appears as if that is all we are. But what we forget is that behind and above this is the soul. And these are only a partial or a limited and erroneous expression of the soul. And the barrier that separates our mind from that deepest reality, which we truly are, is something which is not beyond being weakened. We can weaken it, make it thinner, and eventually it can be rent. So when you get rid of this barrier, this veil that separates the mind from this higher consciousness, which we are, then, you know, we find that not only we have access to higher level of knowledge, we can make better choices, but we can in fact transcend many of the ordinary limitations of the human being. And therefore, as an individual, we can grow by knowing that, yes, as a working sort of instrument, the mind as it is okay, but we can always go beyond the mind. So it's good to know that. But then till we do that, the ego does help us, and the individuality is important. each individual can grow towards sort of dissolving this barrier between the mind and his or her deepest self, also to some extent by utilizing the same instrument, that is the ego. And very often that is how we begin. Let me put it like this. Rooted in ego are all the desires that we have. So they are an expression of the ego. So what we learn from those who have understood life is that you can try to fulfill these desires, but the fulfillment of no worldly desire will bring you lasting happiness. Now, what we do is we still go about fulfilling our desires, and then we find that history keeps repeating itself. We get some satisfaction for a limited period of time, but not really lasting happiness by such fulfillment of any of these desires. Our desires could include a bright career, wealth, name and fame, prestige, power, position, all these things. All these are a part of the different types of desires that we have. Some of these may be fulfilled, and yet the person finds that did not bring lasting happiness. Now this knowledge that this person had starts becoming more and more real to the person. And then he starts looking for something which is higher than this, something which will give this person a sense of fulfillment. And that he knows is not going to happen with more of the same, that is fulfillment of still more desires which are rooted in the same ego. But at the same time, the ego, which was his instrument for satisfaction of these desires, he might have failed also in fulfilling some of the desires, but he did succeed in fulfilling some of them. So the ego which helped him fulfill some of these desires is the instrument that he presses into service also for giving a new direction to his life. He knows that now it is not going to be more of the same. I'll look for a more enduring, lasting source of happiness, which will give me a sense of fulfillment, a true sense of fulfillment. So this fact, I will give a new direction to my life. That also comes from the same I. So still the ego remains important. And this instrument continues to be important even after he is given a new direction to his life, even after he has started walking the spiritual path more seriously and consciously, even after he has made considerable progress on the path and he has started realizing more and more that deeper layer of reality, which is deeper than the ordinary mind. This instrument continues to help this person. And there's no harm in that. The only problem begins when this ego, which is a helper to start with, starts becoming a barrier. Sri Aurobindo has said that also somewhere, that ego is the helper, ego is the bar. So the ego helps us even on the spiritual path up to a pretty advanced stage. Now, when does the difficulty begin? When instead of being a helper, it becomes a barrier or an obstacle. It becomes an obstacle when we can't make further progress because of various attachments. Attachments to possessions, attachments to relationships. It is then that it happens. And what are the signs that now it is becoming a barrier? When one finds that it is because of these attachments that I'm not able to give an expression to the wider consciousness that I have developed. I'm not able to give full expression to it because of these bondages, attachments to not only possessions and relationships, but to some extent even the work that I do, because this work may no longer be the best way to grow further. When we need a switch, a transition to another type of work. So all these things create a feeling of uneasiness. And when that feeling of uneasiness develops because one finds that one feels restricted and constrained by these attachments which are rooted in the ego, that is the time when one can try to get rid of the ego. So the ego, is like a railway ticket or an air ticket. It's a very useful piece, useful document to be kept carefully. But once the journey is over, it is not of much use. You can throw it and get into a taxi. So you can change the vehicle. So that is what happens in life also. Up to a pretty advanced stage, even on the spiritual path, the ego is helpful. But when the time comes to discard it and one starts feeling uneasy because of these restrictions, because of the restrictions created by the ego, in which are rooted all the attachments, then the time comes to start getting rid of it altogether. Okay.
Yes, I think that answers my question. You have explained it in a very comprehensive manner. That really answers a lot of doubts.
I'm happy. Thank you.
Thank